In the forgotten corners of the world, there are stories not written in books, only whispered during storms, when the wind carries voices that are not our own. Welcome to Folk Fear, where ancient rituals, forbidden legends, and cursed bloodlines still breathe in the shadows. Tonight's tale is not about monsters in the forest. It's about something far more terrifying. A mother. A birth. A choice that should never be made. This is The Shadow Midwife, a chilling descent into guilt, tradition, and the horrors passed down through womb and whisper. Keep your eyes closed, and if you hear breathing behind you, don't look back.
The rain had not stopped for 7 days. It dripped from the bamboo eaves like a slow chant, and the wind curled through the cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of wet soil and dying leaves. In the corner of the small, stilted hut, Ara sat alone, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, one hand pressing against her belly. She was 17. Her skin was pale with worry, her hair stuck to her temples with sweat. Outside, chickens scratched in the mud. Inside, silence pressed down like an unseen hand. Her mother had gone to the market hours ago. She never said when she would return, but Ara knew she would bring rice, dried herbs, and maybe, just maybe, something to quiet the womb. She didn't want to quiet it anymore. At first, when her belly began to swell and her blood stopped flowing, Ara panicked. She boiled bitter roots. She drank spirits until her mouth went numb. Her mother, always stern, always watching, refused to look at her for a week. "You brought this on yourself," she had whispered, the words like glass. "Don't expect anyone to clean the mess." But now the baby kicked, not gently like a fish in still water, but sharp, like a warning. Ara could feel it, pressing against her insides, restless, urgent. And despite the shame, the fear, the silence of the man who vanished the moment she whispered, "I'm late," she no longer wanted it gone. She wanted to know its face. That was the most terrifying part. She had never seen the father's eyes look at her kindly. He was handsome, yes, charming in that dangerous way that girls like her weren't supposed to be near. He was older, from the city, passing through, promised to return, never did. Her mother said the child would be born cursed, born of betrayal, born of guilt, born in the shadow of sin. In their village, every birth was sacred and feared. Some babies were never meant to enter the world. That was what the elders said. That was why the midwives here whispered prayers louder than they spoke. That was why some babies were born silently. Ara didn't know much about the old stories, but she remembered one thing her grandmother once said before her tongue went silent in her final days. If the blood in the womb carries sorrow, the child must not be born into light. Now, as the rain topped out a lullaby only ghosts would understand, Ara stared down at her stomach. It pulsed gently beneath her palm. Something moved, not just with life, but with knowing. And for the first time, she wondered if the child inside her already knew it wasn't supposed to be born. He had a name that sounded like running water. Smooth, quick, gone before you could hold it. Ara never spoke it out loud anymore, not even when she dreamed. In the village, names had power. To speak his now would only rot the wound further. He arrived in the rainy season, riding a rust-colored motorbike with a cracked mirror and city smoke clinging to his shirt. Outsiders rarely stayed long in the valley. They said the fog made their bones ache, that the trees watched them sleep. But he stayed for a while. He said he was a surveyor, here to study the soil, maybe bring roads through the mountains someday. He laughed at the way the village elders whispered and crossed themselves when he passed. He wasn't afraid of spirits or curses or shadowed traditions, and that was what made him dangerous. Ara was drawn to the heat in his voice, the smell of sweat and cigarettes on his jacket. She didn't care that her mother warned her to keep away. She didn't care that the village girls watched her with jealous eyes. She wanted to feel wanted, and he made her feel that for a few nights. It wasn't love, it wasn't even kindness. It was the illusion of escape. The first time they lay together was behind the old rice barn, where the moonlight could not reach. She remembered the way he touched her cheek afterward, as if trying to remember her face for later. And now she knew he was. By the time the rains ended, so had he. One morning his motorbike was gone. No note, no goodbye. Only the crushed flowers where they last stood together, now rotting in the mud. Weeks passed. When her stomach turned sour in the mornings, she convinced herself it was the water. When her belly began to swell, she told herself it was nothing. But when her mother found the bloodied cloths she tried to burn, there were no more lies. The house fell silent. Her mother didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply turned her back and said, "You will not shame this family in the daylight." And Ara understood. No one would speak of the man who vanished. No one would help her. No one would witness the birth. That was why she would have to do it alone. That was why late at night she listened for footsteps that didn't belong to the living. That was why she began asking old women about stories they refused to repeat. Because if her child came from darkness, it might only survive in darkness. And if the old legend was true, there was only one way to bring it into the world without inviting the curse. She would have to call the one who walks in shadow, the one who delivers, not life, but silence. The Shadow Midwife. The forest spoke louder than the people did. At least that's what Ara had always believed. In the village, mouths stayed shut behind wooden doors, and secrets soaked into soil like spilled oil. But in the trees, nothing was hidden. Every bird call, every crack of a branch, every rustle of unseen feet, it all meant something. And lately, it all whispered one word: beware. She took to walking alone, deeper than she ever had before, past the thickets where children weren't allowed, past the shrine with the broken bells, past the trees whose trunks were wrapped in old red cloth, warning anyone with sense not to go further. But Ara didn't have sense anymore, only desperation. Her child kicked more violently now. Sometimes at night she woke with the taste of iron in her mouth and no memory of how she'd bitten her own tongue. Her dreams were full of rivers that ran backward and cribs made of bone. It was during one of those walks that she heard the old woman speak, not to her, but to the forest. The woman stood barefoot on a moss-covered stone, her face veiled in black netting. She whispered in a tongue Ara didn't understand, her hands cupped as if offering something to the wind. Ara hid behind a tree and watched, unmoving. When the old woman finished, she turned, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes, two milky pearls, looked directly into Ara's. "You shouldn't listen, not unless you're ready to be heard back." Ara stepped out. "I need to know." "About the midwife. Ara's breath caught. The old woman smiled, slow, crooked. She doesn't like being spoken of, but she's always listening when her name is remembered. Ara hesitated. She helps cursed births? She delivers what should not live, but she does not heal. She does not bless. She ensures silence for the sake of the living. Can she take away the curse? Ara whispered. No, she only prevents it from spreading. Ara touched her belly instinctively. The baby moved beneath her palm, as if responding. The forest fell quiet. Not a bird, not a breeze, only the pulse in her ears. If I wanted to call her, how? The old woman's eyes clouded further, as if rolling back. There is no call, only surrender. You must prepare the space, burn the right herbs, draw the symbols with your own blood, and most importantly, she paused, voice dropping low, never look her in the face. Ara nodded slowly, feeling her chest tighten. The old woman turned to leave, but said one last thing before vanishing between the trees. Every village has their way of hiding shame. Ours wears a veil and walks on shadow. Ara hadn't visited her grandmother's grave in years. It sat at the far end of the ancestral plot, half swallowed by wild grass and creeping vines, marked by a cracked stone etched with a single name, Naya. No dates, no epitaph, just the name, and beneath it, a symbol carved faintly, almost erased by time. A circle with 4 downward strokes, like a sun bleeding into the earth. She didn't understand it then, but now the shape haunted her. It was the same one the old woman in the forest had drawn into the air with her finger, as if tracing something remembered from before memory itself. Her grandmother used to speak of things no one else dared, in hushed tones, by candlelight. When Ara was a child, she would sit by the old woman's feet and listen as tales unraveled like smoke. Stories about spirits who lived between breaths, about births that should never happen under a full moon, about a time when women did not scream during labor because they feared who might hear them. And most of all, about her, the one who was not a woman, but took a woman's shape, the one who came when a child bore the sins of its parents, the one they called the midwife of shadows. She only comes if invited, grandmother once whispered. But once she comes, she must finish her work. Ara had never asked what that work was. She was too young, too afraid. But now fear had no use, only answers mattered. She returned home that night and dug through the old wooden chest beneath the sleeping mat. It had once belonged to her grandmother. Her mother never touched it. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth and dried herbs, she found scrolls of parchment, handwritten prayers, diagrams made of symbols and blood moon dates, a knife made of bone, a bundle of hair bound in red twine, and at the bottom, an old veil, black lace, delicate and dusty, folded with care. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. The smell of ash rose instantly, as if the fabric remembered fire. That night, Ara waited until her mother had fallen asleep and then lit a single oil lamp. She laid everything out in silence. She memorized the shapes, the chants, the steps, the warnings. And when she read the final line on the oldest parchment, her blood went cold. If your eyes betray you, she will take more than the child. She will take your shadow, She will take your name, and when she returns, you will not recognize your own face in the mirror." Ara pressed her hand against her swollen belly. The child shifted again, slower this time, as if listening, as if waiting.
It had to be built where no one could hear the baby cry, or not cry. That was the first rule. The scrolls were clear. The birthing must take place in silence and shadow, away from the breath of the village, away from the eyes of the living. Even the wind was not to be trusted, for it could carry a wail to ears that should never hear. So Aura waited for dawn, when the fog was thickest, and carried supplies on her back into the forest. 3 trips. No one saw her leave. No one asked. At the edge of the woods, where the ferns grew high and the trees bent unnaturally inward, she found an abandoned clearing near a split stone altar covered in moss. No birds sang here. No insects buzzed. Even the leaves refused to rustle. It felt perfect. She used bamboo and thatch from the old tool shed, bound with dried vines. The walls stood crooked, the roof leaked in 2 places, but it didn't matter. The hut wasn't meant to last. It only had to stand long enough to witness a birth, or a burial. Inside, she laid dried herbs in each corner, rosemary, bitter root, and black ginger, just as the instructions said. She smeared ash across the walls in a spiral pattern, using the bone knife she found in her grandmother's chest. When her fingers cramped from the cold, she bit her lip and kept drawing. On the floor, she laid out the cloth, white linen dyed with drops of her own blood. In the center, she placed the veil. She had not worn it yet. That would come later, when the contractions began, when her body opened and the air grew cold, when she would offer her child to the one who came in silence. By the 3rd day, the hut was finished. The villagers were beginning to notice she no longer came to the well. Her mother asked no questions. She simply left meals by the door and never looked her in the eye. Ara had already left in a way. Her mind lived in the forest now, among the rituals and symbols, with the flickering lamp and the bone knife and the prayers that burned when spoken aloud. She whispered them every night until her voice cracked. The child inside her moved only at dusk, always at dusk, and she had begun to notice something else, something she hadn't told anyone, not even herself. When she walked back to the village each evening, her shadow always arrived before she did. There were no incantations, no loud cries to the heavens, no ritual drums, no fire set alight with thunder. The summoning of the Shadow Midwife was not about volume. It was about silence, stillness, surrender. The scrolls said she heard only what was not spoken. She came not when called, but when needed, not to answer, but to complete what others feared to begin. Ara waited until the moon waned thin, like a blade not yet drawn. That was the time. She wrapped herself in a plain cloth robe, barefoot, hair unbraided, belly heavy and low. She walked alone to the forest hut. The earth felt softer than usual beneath her feet, as if it had been waiting, as if it had opened itself slightly, ready to take. Inside the hut, she lit one oil lamp and nothing more. Then she began. First, she drew the circle in blood. 10 drops, no more, no less, each from the same wound she made on her fingertip. Each drop placed with intention around her body, a ring of consequence. Next, the herbs burned slowly, never directly in flame. They were to release their scent in surrender, not in pain.
the air filled with bitter sweetness, and something beneath it, something metallic, unnatural. Then the veil. She placed it over her head and closed her eyes. The final part was the hardest, to let go of fear, of pride, of the desperate hope that the child could be normal, could be untouched, could be clean despite its blood. She sat in the circle. The belly shifted, a sharp twist, a low ache blooming in her spine. She whispered, not aloud but inward, "If you must come, come now. I offer this child to silence. I offer myself to the veil. Let the line end with me." And then she waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The oil lamp flickered once, and the shadows moved. Not with the wind, there was none. Not with her breath, she held it. But they moved. On the wall behind her, something took shape, thin, bent, moving like water down a slope. It did not crawl, it did not walk. It simply appeared, unfolding from the corners of the hut like smoke finding its form. She kept her eyes shut tight beneath the veil. The air grew colder. The herbs hissed. The child twisted violently inside her, then stopped. Then a hand. Not touching, but hovering. A presence that had no voice, yet pressed against her skin like fog. The Shadow Midwife had come, and she said nothing. There was no welcome, no judgment, only a quiet so deep it drowned the breath from Ara's lungs. The ritual had begun, and Ara knew she could never, under any circumstance, look up, not even if the child screamed, not even if it begged, not even if the voice that called her name sounded like someone she loved. The pain came like a wave pulled from bone. Ara bit down on her own wrist to keep from screaming. The circle of blood around her had long since dried into the floor, but she dared not cross it. She dared not shift. The veil clung to her face, soaked in sweat and silence. She was no longer alone. Something stood just beyond the lamplight. She couldn't see it. She didn't need to. She could feel it. Tall, bent, swaying slightly, as though its breath moved through air not made for lungs. It didn't speak. It didn't guide. But it was watching, waiting. The contractions tore through her like curses spoken backwards. She fell forward onto her hands, the linen beneath her knees now wet with something more than blood. The child was coming. The moment stretched like skin over fire. Her body broke open in stifled agony, the forest pressing in around the hut like it too was holding its breath. Her fingers scraped the ground, her teeth clenched until they ached, and then release. A final push, a soundless sob, a sudden stillness. She felt it. Warm, small, heavy. The baby. For a moment, Ara couldn't move. Her heart thundered so loudly it drowned everything else. Her face, still veiled, lifted slightly toward the edge of the cloth, but she stopped herself. She remembered. Do not look. The air shifted. She felt it, the movement, not hers, not the baby's. The midwife had stepped forward. There was no cold touch, no cutting of cords, no whispered blessing, only the sound of fabric brushing against dirt. And then silence, and it stretched and stretched until Ara realized there was no cry, no breath, no whimper, no movement, nothing. She didn't know how long she waited. Minutes, maybe more. Her arms trembled, her knees bled, her lips cracked from holding back the question burning in her throat. Was it alive? She almost asked, but asking would be speaking, and speaking would break the rite. So she stayed still, listening, hoping, dreading. Then, faintly, the baby moved, not in her arms, not in the circle, but behind her, somewhere outside the ring of blood. She didn't understand. She hadn't moved. She hadn't held it. And still she heard it, a soft shifting, a breathless presence. The veil fluttered, the lamp flickered once, then died. Darkness fell like a curtain, and in that blackness there was one thing she knew with bone-deep certainty. The baby had been born, but it had not been placed in her arms. It had not cried, and whatever now breathed behind her wasn't waiting to be loved.
Her breath caught in her throat. She had not moved. She had not looked. And yet, something inside her screamed that something had changed. The baby had been born, but not to her. Not in her arms. Not in warmth. Not in light. The veil clung to her damp skin, heavy with heat and terror. She sat frozen in the circle, her knees numb, her fingers blood-stained and trembling. Somewhere behind her, something shifted softly, like cloth dragging over wood. Ada tried to slow her breath. The ritual was not finished. She remembered every line. Keep your head bowed, do not speak, do not reach, and above all, do not look. But her body betrayed her. Pain lanced up her spine. A cramp seized her leg. She swayed forward, dizzy from blood loss and fear. Instinctively, blindly, she reached one trembling hand toward the floor for balance. And the veil slipped. Just an inch. Just enough for her eyes to open. She didn't mean to. But in that one shallow breath, that single flicker of weakness, she looked. And what she saw wasn't human. A woman, yes, or something like it. Tall, dressed in black cloth soaked in centuries. Her hands long and thin, ending in fingers too many. Her face was veiled, but the veil was made of shadow, not fabric, shifting like smoke in water. Beneath it, there were no eyes, no mouth, only hollows. And yet, those hollows looked back at her. They saw her. The Shadow Midwife didn't move. She didn't lunge. She didn't scream. She simply paused, as if surprised, as if curious. And then she turned, slowly, to look at the newborn lying on the dirt floor. The baby was facing upward, not crying, not breathing, but its eyes were open, wide, unblinking, and looking at her. Ada gasped, slamming the veil back over her face. Too late. The cold hit instantly. Not the cold of weather, but of something leaving. Something sacred. Something she would never get back. She clutched her stomach, empty. The pain was gone, but so was something else. The hut grew unbearably still. And then, as if pulled back into the trees by unseen threads, the presence faded. No sound, no farewell, only the baby lying in silence, and the mother shaking in the center of a circle that no longer protected her. She crawled to the child. Her body moved without her will. She reached with hesitant, bloodied hands, touched its skin,
It was warm, but the warmth didn't feel right. She leaned close, her veil still in place. She didn't look at the midwife again, only the child. And what she saw would haunt every breath for the rest of her life. Its eyes were wide, too wide, as if it had seen everything, not the world, but the place before it. The baby blinked once, slowly, then smiled. Not a reflex, not innocence, a knowing smile, a cruel smile. And Ara understood. The midwife had not taken the child. She had left something else in its place.
They say a silent baby is either a blessing or a warning. For the first few days, Ara tried to believe it was a blessing. The child never cried, never stirred. It slept with eyes half open, its breath so shallow she often held a mirror to its lips just to see the fog. The neighbors assumed she had gone to stay with relatives. No one came to ask. Her mother said nothing, but Ara watched, and she knew. It was too quiet, too still. Not the stillness of peace, but of waiting. It didn't blink when the wind blew through the cracks in the wall. It didn't flinch at thunder. It never startled in sleep. And its shadow moved when it shouldn't. Sometimes it stretched the wrong way under the lantern light. Sometimes it moved faster than its body, twitching when the baby didn't. And once, only once, Ara saw the shadow crawl across the wall while the child remained perfectly still in her arms. She stopped lighting lamps after that. At night, the baby made soft sounds, not crying, but something else. A low hum, almost mechanical, almost like breathing through water. A sound no newborn should know how to make. Sometimes it murmured, not words, not yet, but patterns, rhythms, like something remembering a language it had once forgotten. One evening, Ara laid the child in its crib and turned to wipe her hands. When she turned back, its eyes were already open, watching her. Not searching, not wondering, studying. She whispered its name, the name she had chosen before the birth, but the baby didn't respond. She said it again, still nothing. Then she whispered another name, a name she didn't know she knew, and the baby smiled. Ara's skin turned cold. That night she tried to sleep, but couldn't. She sat in the corner, clutching a blanket, watching the crib. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just fear, just shadows playing tricks. But deep down, something had taken root. A truth no mother wanted to believe. The baby she brought back from the forest might not have followed her out alone. The next morning, she went to the temple. The old monk who greeted her only looked at the child once and went silent. He refused to bless it, refused to even touch it. He only said one thing before closing the door. Some births should not be named. The crib had become a shrine to silence. Eric kept it in the far corner of the room, away from windows, away from mirrors. She lined it with soft cloth and dried herbs, just as the scrolls had taught. She placed red thread beneath the mattress, salt in the corners, charcoal symbols beneath the legs, all meant to ward off spirits. But they didn't work. Every morning, the symbols were smudged. Every night the salt grew damp, and the shadow, long, slow, crawling, returned beneath the crib, even when there was no light to cast it. She tried to ignore it. She told herself shadows were just tricks of the lamp, that maybe she was still healing, still fragile, that maybe her grief was warping her thoughts. But then came the scratching. At first it was faint, like something small, mice perhaps, but it didn't come from the walls. It came from the floorboards, right beneath where the baby slept. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. She crouched beside the crib one evening and pressed her ear to the wooden boards. She waited, breath held tight in her chest. Nothing. Then, faintly, she heard it. Not scratching, not mice. Breathing. Slow, deep, wet, coming from beneath. She jumped back, heart pounding. She lifted the crib, hands shaking, expecting to see insects, a nest, something logical, something real. But there was nothing. Only a small handprint in the dust under the crib. Too large to be the baby's, too narrow to be hers, too fresh to be old. And then, as she stood in shock, something inside the crib moved. She turned. The baby was sitting up. Not gradually, not like a baby learning to crawl, but upright, stiff, sudden, its eyes locked on hers. And it smiled. Again, that same knowing, hollow smile. She stumbled back. Her heel struck the bone knife that she had kept beneath her bed, the one from her grandmother's chest. She didn't remember placing it there. She didn't remember taking it home. But it was waiting for her, just like everything else. She reached down, picked it up, and held it to her chest. The baby didn't blink, didn't laugh, just watched. Later that night, when she finally lay down, she turned her face to the wall, and she saw it, her own shadow on the wall opposite her bed. But it wasn't moving with her. It was facing the crib, still, unattached, watching.
Ara hadn't stepped into the council hall since she was a child. It was where blessings were given, where fates were whispered, where births and deaths were recorded in ink and ash. And though no one said it aloud, it was also where stories went to die, buried under tradition and silence. She wrapped the child tightly in cloth before she entered. It didn't squirm. It never did. The hall was dim, lit only by lanterns that flickered against the carved wooden walls. 7 elders sat in a curved row, faces wrinkled and still. Their eyes, old, faded, cautious, followed her as she stepped inside, barefoot, eyes low. She didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. They knew why she had come. One of them, a man with milky eyes and prayer beads worn smooth by decades, gestured for her to speak. She stepped forward. "My child," she said slowly, "was born during the fog." A pause. "I followed the rites. I performed them as they were written. I veiled myself. I never spoke. I never looked until—" Her voice cracked. She took a breath. "But something is wrong. The baby doesn't cry. It doesn't sleep like others. And its shadow," she stopped, swallowing hard, "moves when it shouldn't." The elders remained still. Not one blinked. Ara felt the silence stretch. It pressed against her chest like water rising. Then she asked the question she had feared since that night. "Did I summon the wrong spirit?" The elder with the beads cleared his throat, but he didn't answer. Instead, the woman beside him, A small figure with cloudy gray eyes and a mouth pressed tight with age spoke without looking at her. You performed a rite meant to be forgotten. That knowledge was buried for a reason. I was desperate, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. And now, the old woman said, you've invited something that doesn't forget. The air in the hall turned heavier. Ara stepped closer. Please, tell me what I've done. The old woman finally looked at her. You didn't bring a child into this world. You opened a door. Ara's fingers tightened around the bundle in her arms. One of the elders shifted in his seat. Another whispered a prayer. But no one offered help. No one came forward. They had known, all along, and they had done nothing. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You knew this would happen if I saw her. Still, no answer. You knew she would leave behind this. The baby stirred in her arms for the first time in days. A soft rustle, no sound, but every elder looked toward it, and every face flinched, as if they saw something not swaddled in cloth, but coiled in shadow. Ara turned without being dismissed. She walked out without bowing. Behind her, the great wooden doors shut slowly. No footsteps followed. No voice called her back. She had brought the silence into their house, and now not even the wise dared speak its name.
There was only one mirror left in the house. The others had been covered or taken down, hidden beneath bed sheets or tossed into storage. Era didn't remember doing it, but they were gone, all the same. Only this one remained, small, oval, hung above the basin where she once washed her face each morning. Its edges were tarnished, its glass worn soft with time. It hadn't shown her a true reflection in weeks. And yet that morning she stood before it. The baby lay quiet in the next room, always quiet, too quiet. She stared into the mirror, searching her own face. Her eyes looked different now, hollow, sleepless, stretched thin by something heavier than exhaustion. Her cheeks were sharper, her lips pale. She barely recognized herself. But worse than that, something in her reflection seemed slightly delayed. A second too slow, a flicker too wrong. She lifted her hand to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. The mirror didn't move. She froze. Her hand still hovered in the air, but in the mirror, it remained still at her side. And then, slowly, it lifted, but not to mirror her gesture. The hand in the reflection rose to point directly at her. Era stumbled back, her shoulder striking the wall. The mirror began to tremble on its hook, not from her touch, but from something inside it. A hum, deep and cold, began to fill the room like the breath of something waking up. Crack! A fine line etched across the glass, splitting her face down the center. Crack! Another webbed out like a spider's leg. And then, shatter! The mirror exploded outward, shards scattering like teeth torn from a mouth. Era shielded her face, but one piece sliced across her cheek. Blood bloomed instantly. Silence returned. She looked down. The largest shard lay at her feet, sharp and angled upward. And in it, just for a second, she saw her own reflection again. But this time, the eyes looking back weren't hers. They were black, bottomless, smiling. And in the background, behind the reflection, a figure stood in shadow, veiled,
still, watching. Era kicked the shard across the floor. Then from the next room, the baby let out a sound, not a cry, but a laugh, soft, breathless, almost human. She didn't move, didn't breathe. She knew whatever had been waiting behind that glass wasn't done. It started with the sound of cloth dragging across wood. Late at night, always at the same hour, when the fog crept through the cracks in the walls and the oil lamp dimmed for no reason at all. Ara had grown used to the quiet, but not this. This was a silence too full. It pressed in, it watched her breathe, it carried weight. She stopped sleeping. She sat in the corner each night, back against the wall, the baby swaddled tightly beside her, even though it never stirred. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, and beyond it, the hall that always seemed just a little darker than the rest of the house. That was where she first saw the veil. Not the one she wore, the other one. Thin, black, drifting like mist at the end of the hallway. She didn't chase it. She didn't scream. She simply closed the door. But the next night, it returned. Closer. This time she heard breathing. Slow, rhythmic, not like an animal, not like a person, like something mimicking the living, badly. The door creaked in its frame. The baby blinked wide-eyed and turned its head toward the noise with unnatural precision, like it already knew who was coming. Ara clutched the child tighter. She whispered prayers she didn't remember learning. She smeared ash across the floor, salt in the corners, thread above the doorway, but nothing stopped it. On the third night, the lantern shattered by itself. The room went dark. Ara didn't move. The air grew colder, then damp like the inside of a cave. Her breath came in clouds. She pressed her back against the crib, eyes wide in the dark. Then she heard the floorboards groan. Something was inside the room, but not walking. It slid, like a veil dragging behind it. The baby began to hum. Not cry, not laugh, just a low, eerie melody that rose from its throat as if someone else was using its voice. And Ara knew. She had seen the midwife's face, and once seen, she was never truly gone. The ritual had been broken, the door left open, and now, each night, the midwife returned, not to take the baby, but to finish what she started. That night, Ara didn't sleep. She held the child close, watched the window turn from black to gray with the approaching dawn, and as the first light touched the floorboards, she whispered one question aloud. If she didn't take the child, then what did she leave behind? The baby didn't answer, but its shadow, cast by no light at all, curled gently around her feet.
The lantern was full when Era lit it. She remembered filling it with clear oil just hours before. She had checked the wick, cleaned the glass, placed it carefully on the floor beside the crib, close enough to watch the baby, far enough to keep shadows at bay. But now, the flame flickered strangely, not from wind, from something else. It cast no warmth, only light, and even that seemed wrong. The glow spread too far in some places, not at all in others. The corners of the room pulsed in and out of shadow, like a heart beating behind walls. And the oil inside. She leaned closer, frowning.
It had turned dark. Not brown, not cloudy. Red. Thick. Mottled. It swirled slowly in the glass base of the lantern like something alive, like something that had once bled. She reached out with shaking fingers and unscrewed the cap. The scent hit her instantly. Copper. Meat. It wasn't oil. It was blood. Fresh. Warm. She dropped the lid. It clattered to the floor. Behind her, the baby giggled. Not softly, not like a child, but sharp, mocking. She spun around. The crib was still. The child lay inside, unmoving, eyes wide and glowing slightly in the lantern's crimson light. And then she saw it. Hair. Long black strands clinging to the crib slats like seaweed caught in a net. It hadn't been there before. It trailed down the side of the crib, across the floor, curling gently toward the lantern. Era staggered back. Her heel struck something soft. She turned. A hand. Thin, pale, twisted at the wrist. Not reaching, not grabbing, just resting on the floor beside her like it belonged there. There was no body attached, no blood trail, just the hand. And as she watched, it twitched once, then curled into a fist. She screamed. She didn't remember screaming, but she must have. The sound echoed through the house, sharp enough to make the baby blink, slow enough to drag something back into silence. The hand was gone. The hair, too. The blood in the lantern faded, turning back to oil drop by drop, as if rewinding a memory. But she knew it had happened. The veil between her and that world, the world of the midwife, was thinning. Every night it frayed a little more, and something was leaking through. Not to take the child, not to harm Era, but to stay. At first, Ara was grateful for the silence. The baby slept through the night. No cries, no fussing, no hunger. It lay still beneath the blankets, its eyes often half open, as if dreaming with purpose, as if watching from within. The villagers whispered that Ara was lucky, that her child must be touched by peace. But peace, she knew, did not come with shadows that curled under doors. It did not come with mirrors that no longer reflected her. It did not come with dreams that weren't hers, but his. The child no longer blinked. It only stared. When she fed it, it swallowed without sound. When she bathed it, the water chilled instantly. And one morning, when she pressed her ear to its chest, just to be sure, just to feel something, there was no heartbeat, nothing, no rise, no fall, just stillness. And yet, it breathed, slow, mechanical, measured. Ara dropped the cloth. Her fingers trembled as she stepped back. The baby didn't notice, or maybe it did. Its eyes, black around the edges now, followed her. She waited for it to cry, to wail, to remind her it was real, but it didn't, because it wasn't asleep. Not really. It was resting, growing. Each morning it looked older, slightly, subtly. Its limbs stretched just a little longer, its skin less soft, more taut, its gaze sharper. And worst of all, its smile became more practiced, no longer innocent, no longer accidental. It smiled when she prayed. It smiled when she cried. It smiled when she whispered to the spirit of her grandmother, begging for help. The baby slept, but not like children do. It slept like something hiding, like a seed waiting in soil soaked with blood. And each time Ara touched it, she felt colder, as if something in her was being siphoned, quietly, gently, with no pain, only absence. One evening, she reached for its hand, and it gripped hers back, strong, too strong. And in that moment, she knew the baby was not asleep. It was listening.
There were things Ara's grandmother had never spoken in front of the family. Things she only muttered when the lanterns burned low, when the wind shifted strange through the trees, and when no one else was listening. But Ara had listened. Even as a child, crouched beneath woven blankets and pretending to sleep, she had memorized the sound of her grandmother's voice when it changed, when it wasn't telling bedtime stories, but truths disguised as warnings. She remembered one whisper most clearly. "If you ever see her face, don't tell anyone, because she'll come back for you through someone else." That memory had returned like a thorn in her mind. And so, on the 7th day after the mirror shattered, Ara did what she swore she never would. She went to the family altar. Her grandmother's ashes rested inside a small clay urn, wrapped in red cloth, hidden behind rows of incense sticks and offerings long forgotten. Her mother never lit them. No one did. But that night, Ara did. She burned rice. She whispered her name. She laid out dried hibiscus petals in a circle. Then she sat cross-legged in front of the urn, the baby cradled beside her, silent and still as always. The flame trembled. So did the air. Ara bowed her head. "Grandmother, you knew." The shadows in the room lengthened, curling toward the doorway. A soft creak echoed in the floorboards, though no one walked across them. "I saw her, the midwife. I broke the rule." A pause. The baby stirred. She didn't look at him, not now. She kept her eyes fixed on the urn. "I didn't see the ritual, though. She didn't take the child. She left something else, and it's growing. It's becoming something I don't understand." The silence shifted. And then, behind her, a voice spoke. Dry, soft, familiar. "You were never supposed to know the ritual." Ara froze. The baby went still. She turned slowly, and there, just past the reach of the altar light, stood the outline of her grandmother. Not flesh, not quite shadow, a memory too strong to fade. I called her once, during a season of famine. I was young, foolish. I thought I could save what was dying. Her voice cracked. I looked too. Ara's heart thundered. "What happened?" she asked. The figure stepped closer, but her face remained obscured in flickering light. "She took the child, and for years I thought the ritual worked. But the older I got, the more I realized she didn't leave with empty hands." "What did she leave?" Ara whispered. Her grandmother's silhouette tilted its head. "A hunger, one that doesn't end." Ara felt cold creep up her spine. "It skips a generation sometimes, waits until the next woman is desperate, until she calls the shadow again." The flame began to shrink. The voice began to fade. "One day, the child will stop pretending to be yours." And then, nothing. The light went out. The room was empty, and the urn cracked down the middle. And the baby,
lying quietly at her feet, began to hum a song Ara had never taught him, but had heard once before, beneath her grandmother's breath, many years ago.
The earth was softer than it should have been, even after the rains, even after years. Ara's fingers sank into it with little effort, the dirt moist and cold, clinging to her skin like it wanted her to stop, but not enough to stop her. She had waited until midnight, wrapped the child in 3 layers of cloth, and left him inside, watching from the cradle with those wide, ancient eyes. He wouldn't cry. He never did. The graveyard stood at the edge of the forest, behind the temple no one prayed in anymore. It was where the elders buried those who died strangely, those whispered about, not mourned. No markers, no names, but Ara remembered. She had seen her grandmother here once, when she was only 8, kneeling before a mound of earth, muttering through clenched teeth, pouring blackened oil into the soil. Ara hadn't understood then. Now she did. The grave she sought had no headstone, just a split tree stump beside it, grown sideways, as if trying to crawl away. She didn't bring a shovel, just her hands. She dug until her nails cracked, until her breath fogged the night, until something hard met her palm. Not wood, not stone, bone. A box made of carved bone. She pulled it from the earth with trembling arms. Symbols covered every inch of it, etched deep, smeared with old blood. A lid held shut by twine blackened with rot. She hesitated, and then she opened it. Inside lay a bundle of fabric, black, threadbare, folded with care. The same veil she had worn during the birth, but older, identical, and beneath it a small bundle of ash wrapped in paper. When she unfolded it, a single word was scrawled in fading ink: mine. The wind rose suddenly, shrieking through the trees, like something remembering how to scream. Ara staggered back, from the box, from the veil, from the word. Behind her, she heard a twig snap. She turned, but there was no one. No lanterns, no footsteps, no movement. Except for the baby. He stood at the edge of the graveyard, not crawling, not toddling, standing. His arms hung at his sides, and his head tilted just slightly, watching. She hadn't brought him. She had locked the door. But he was there, barefoot, silent, smiling. And in that moment, Ara knew this had happened before, not just to her, not just once. The veil had been passed down from one desperate woman to the next, from mother to daughter, from wound to womb. And now, it was his. The man came to the village without a name. No one had seen him arrive. There was no horse, no cart, no sound of footsteps on the gravel path. He simply appeared, standing at the edge of the elder hall at dusk, cloaked in ash-colored robes and a scent of burned sage. Some thought he was a monk, others a healer. But Ara knew before he even spoke, he was here for her. She sat alone on the steps of the well, cradling the baby who had not blinked in 3 days. The villagers gave her wide space now. They no longer whispered when she passed. They simply looked away. The man approached slowly. His eyes were clouded with age, but the way he walked, straight, precise, told her he did not need sight to see. He stopped a few feet from her and lowered his hood. "You broke the veil," he said simply. Ara said nothing. He nodded as if her silence confirmed everything. "They sent for me too late. They always do." He lowered himself to the stone beside her. The baby didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched him with those deep, knowing eyes. The man didn't look at the child. He stared at Ara. "Do you know what you've brought through?" "I thought I was calling her, to stop the curse, to end it." "She is not an end. She is a door, and once opened, something always walks through." Ara clutched the baby tighter. "But I followed the rite." "No one follows it perfectly. Not anymore. That's the trap. It is designed to fail, so the debt continues." She turned her face away. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The man finally looked at the child. His breath caught, and for the first time since arriving, his voice shook. "You have 3 nights left." "Until what?" "Until it no longer needs your body to stay." She felt her blood turn cold. "He's already different," she whispered. "He listens when I sleep. He knows when I lie. He doesn't grow. He changes." The man nodded slowly. "And when the veil lifts for the final time, it won't be your child you're holding. It will be what waits beneath his skin." Ara looked down at the baby. Its face was still, its eyes unblinking, and in the reflection of its pupils, she thought, just for a second, she saw herself, standing in the forest, wearing the veil, smiling. She blinked, and the image was gone. The man stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I can't stop it. No one can. But I can give you this." He handed her a single object, a small pendant, simple, wooden, burned with the same circle and stroke symbol from her grandmother's grave. "It won't protect you, but it will remind him who you are, for now." "For now?" Ara asked, her voice cracking. The man looked at the child one last time, and for the first time since his arrival, he backed away. "I'll be gone before moonrise, so should you." Then he vanished down the path. The wind picked up, the lanterns dimmed, and from the crib in her arms, the baby began to hum, low, ancient, like it already knew she wasn't going anywhere.
The fog rolled in before sunrise, thick, low, alive. It slithered through the rice fields like breath from a mouth too large to see. It swallowed rooftops, smothered the wells, sank into the wood of every home and made the villagers speak in whispers, if they spoke at all. By noon, no one left their house, not even the elders, because by then they'd all heard the same thing, a soft, high-pitched humming that drifted through the mist. A child's tune, off-key, endless. Ara stood alone at the edge of the village, her feet bare, her shawl soaked through. The child, her child, rested on her hip, heavier now, too heavy, as if each breath he took grew denser with something not meant for flesh. She had tried to leave the night before, tried to follow the stranger's warning, but the moment she stepped beyond the old shrine, the air had pushed back. Her legs froze, her ears rang. The child screamed, not in pain, but in protest. He didn't want to leave. And now she understood why. The fog wasn't just weather. It was a veil. A curtain drawn across the world, not to keep things out, but to keep something in. Ara moved through the empty village slowly, lantern in hand. The flame flickered red, no matter how clean the oil. The houses she passed were shuttered tight. No faces in windows, no prayers from porches, only silence, until she reached the elder hall. The door was ajar. Inside, every lantern had gone out, and the elders, gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just the smell of salt and smoke and something beneath the floorboards that pulsed softly, steadily like a second heartbeat under the earth. She turned to leave, but something waited for her outside. Lanterns. Dozens of them. Floating in the fog, drifting shoulder high. No hands holding them, no feet walking beneath. They moved like mourners, a procession with no beginning, no end. And in their flickering light, Ara saw them. Figures. Some were children, some were women, some were not quite either. All veiled, all silent, all watching her. She clutched the baby close. His eyes were wide, glowing faintly. And then he reached out. Toward them. Toward her. Ara stepped back. The fog thickened. The humming grew louder. The lantern circled. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, from the mist, a single figure stepped forward. Tall, veiled, hands long and thin folded in front like a priest at a funeral. The midwife returned not as Shadow, but as Queen. The child in her arms stopped humming. He blinked once and smiled, not at Ara, at her. The midwife raised one hand. The lanterns tilted, bowing in unison. The village behind Ara erupted in silence, and then began to burn. One house, then two, then all of them. But there were no screams, no bodies running, only fog and fire, and a baby in her arms, whose weight was no longer hers to bear. Ara fell to her knees. The midwife stepped forward, and for the first time since the birth, Ara opened her mouth to speak. But the words came not from her. They came from the child, soft, clear, ancient. I remember you. And the lanterns all went out.
No one remembered when the fog finally lifted. The fires burned down to ash. The fields turned to salt. The water in the wells grew black and still. And the village, once humming with rice harvests, children's laughter, whispered prayers, fell silent. Those who remained never spoke of that night. Some claimed it was a curse passed through blood. Others swore it was a punishment for an old betrayal. But most simply left, walked into the forest, and never returned. The house at the edge of the trees still stood, untouched by fire, unclaimed by time, and each night a single lantern glowed in its window, though no one lit it. Inside, the cradle still sat beside the wall. A soft hum echoed through the floorboards. The veil, now faded and brittle, hung from a single nail. And in the center of the room sat Era, but not quite Era. She didn't speak anymore, didn't age, didn't blink,
unless watched. Her skin remained smooth, her hair long and dark. Her hands rested motionless on her lap as if waiting to be given purpose. And beside her, on a rug stitched with symbols long forgotten, sat the child, older now, taller, too tall for his age. His eyes were wrong, too black, too deep, and his voice, when he used it, was not always his own. Sometimes it sounded like Era, sometimes like her grandmother, sometimes like someone who had never been born at all. Each night, when the lantern flickered low, the two of them would sit there, mother and child, face to face, unmoving, and just before midnight, the child would rise. He would take the veil from the wall, and he would place it over her head, gently, reverentially, as if crowning her. Then he would whisper, "You saw her face, now you must wear it." And Era, who was not Era anymore, would smile, not from joy, but from memory, because the ritual had not failed. It had worked exactly as intended. The curse had not been lifted, it had been passed. The midwife did not come to take the child, she came to make one. And now, in the house that no one entered, in the village no one dared to name, the midwife waits, her hands folded, her veil still, until another desperate woman whispers her name in the dark.
They say it began in a forgotten village, a place wrapped in fog, where names rot faster than memories, and silence is inherited like a scar. They say a girl once gave birth there, alone, with shaking hands and eyes too wide. They say she summoned something older than gods and older than shame. And when she broke the rule, when she looked into the veil, it looked back and made her remember, not who she was, but what she would become. Now the stories have spread to other villages, other women, other wombs that carry more than blood. You'll hear them whispered in hospitals with flickering lights, in old maternity wards no one visits anymore, in the silent rooms where the baby never cries, only watches. And always, always, you'll find a mirror cracked down the middle, a crib with shadows that don't belong, a veil that cannot burn. Because the shadow midwife doesn't die, she only waits for the next broken girl, the next cursed child, the next whispered name, maybe yours.